of mentoring, therapy, and coaching in one service where I aim to help high performers elevate their lives. And I've been doing this for, I guess, about half a decade collectively now. And I've just been finding new and exciting ways to help support people on their transformational journeys.
Welcome to this week's Fight to Fly show, where we sit down with guests who have achieved amazing goals, overcome incredible circumstances, and give us tips so that we can do the same. Today, we're talking to Vin Infante. I like to call him Vin Infinite because he is just an infinite being with lots of lessons here for us today. You may have heard of him. He is across social media. He's been on Forbes. He's been an entrepreneur in the media. He is a speaker, and just so honored to have you here with us, Vin. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Tia. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Now, you're a mental performance coach. And tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into that. And I see all the certifications behind you. So let's tell everybody kind of what qualifies you to have this conversation with us today.
Sure. Well, I've spent a while in the personal development field. Initially, I went and followed in the footsteps of my father and became a psychotherapist. So I spent over 10 years working in psychotherapy, doing pretty much everything you could think of. I've been in all different settings, worked with hundreds of people. And then I decided that I didn't really like doing traditional psychotherapy. And so that prompted me to switch careers and become a firefighter. And you might be wondering, well, how does firefighting play into this? Well, I mean, it doesn't fully. It's what allowed me to start my entrepreneurial journey. When I became a firefighter, I also launched my coaching business. Now, I went and I got my coaching certification under Tony Robbins' training program. And at the time, I had seen that both therapy and coaching were great, but also had their own weaknesses. And I set out to create something different. So through my work, I've now created a hybrid of mentoring, therapy, and coaching in one service where I aim to help high performers elevate their lives. And I've been doing this for, I guess, about half a decade collectively now. And I've just been finding new and exciting ways to help support people on their transformational journeys.
I love it. What kind of people are you really, trying to help? Is it men, women, entrepreneurs? Like, who are you looking for?
So my clientele tends to be a bulk of 7 to 9 figure entrepreneurs. I've worked in private equity firms doing some consulting slash coaching. I've worked with startups. So it's really these high performing individuals who have a level of achievement, but know that there is still a level left to be unlocked. And let's be real. Anyone who has any type of success or drive in this life knows that there's always more to it. So now it's just about finding a skill set, a tool set, a knowledge set, a behavior set. Just what's that thing that you're missing? And if you're somebody like that who's driven, but realizing that they need something more, that's usually the person I'll have the conversation with to see if I could help you unlock that piece that's already within you.
You're so right. The high achievers that I meet, some of the people that have reached heights that I dream of reaching are the ones that are most likely to say there's so much more. And even in my life, I, got to a place where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm literally achieving all of my biggest dreams. And then I was like, I need to dream bigger. I'm ready to go higher, So a lot of times when you're in your lower phase, your lower frequency, you haven't really become who you're going to be. You don't see as far down the road as you can see. You only see it in, just like on a real road, you're not going to see 10 miles down the path, unless you're in Texas. It's pretty flat, but I think we see life like that. We see it sometimes 1 mile at a time. And the further I get down the road, the longer I realize that road is on how much I can actually achieve in one lifetime. So it's great that you're helping people just reach higher and higher, because the higher we reach, the broader we reach, right? So like my goal is to reach as many people like on this podcast as possible, to help them break down the barriers that are holding them back from that next level, high achieving lifestyle, which I've realized in my own life, mostly it's us doing that. Right. But I think that's great that that's really what you're doing and your audience. So Tell us a little bit more about how you're doing that, and what you told us what brought you to it, but now what are your goals with this, and how can you help us reach that next level as well?
Sure. So my goals have shifted a bit. I used to sit here and say, well, I just want to do coaching. I just want to work with people one to one, and I still do. However, I've actually come to fall in love with this goal of wanting to impact a billion lives. And I chose that goal for a very specific reason. I think I could do a million lives by myself. I truly believe if I were to just take out ads, run them all day, build more content, I could probably impact a million lives. But a billion is so much more. A billion is going to require me to invite so many people on this. And part of what I love about what I'm doing right now is that I've met so many amazing people, just like yourself, who give me these opportunities to come and speak on their platform. And what you're doing is you're actually teaming up with me. You and I are on that same mission just by you having me here. And so I've chosen a billion lives so that I could do more of this with more people like you, and we could all make a difference together. Now, part of how I'm doing this is obviously through speaking, but the other is that I'm trying to impact and change the way that people are viewing how to transform. And I'm doing that through what I call self mastery, internal leadership, but most importantly, the bridging of the gap between therapy and coaching. Because you'll go to your therapist and you might feel stuck because your therapist will sit in your past too long, or maybe they'll over validate you, or perhaps they just truly don't understand entrepreneurship. And conversely, you might hire a coach, but you might get stuck there because your coach is trying to push you because he's focused on your present and he's focused on your future, but he's not focused on why you're not able to push forward. And it's usually because of something in your past. And so I always sit here and I've always wondered, why are people settling for less than they could have? And it's usually because they're missing something. And then they don't know who to go to. And so they'll go to a therapist and they'll tell them one thing, and they'll go to a coach and they'll tell them another. And then they're not really helping themselves at all. So, what I've been aiming to do is figure out a way to present to high performing entrepreneurs and individuals that want to elevate their lives how they could do it more efficiently, saving time, money, energy, and getting better results in the process. But it's not just me that I want to do this for, right? I actually want to bring this as a new form of helping people. So, I want people to start realizing that there are better ways out there than maybe the things you're currently doing.
Mm.
And that's ultimately what my big aim is.
I've never thought about it that way about, therapy versus coaching. That's real interesting. And I mean, it was clear as day when you say it, right? But I never thought of it before that. I'm glad you figured that out for all of us. I was talking with some friends yesterday and mostly about teenagers, right? But
Mm.
we have some teenagers around us in our families. And we were talking about the difference. So, between nature and nurture, right? And so when
Mm,
a teen, for instance, just as an analogy, when a teen hits a certain part of life and puberty starts happening and they start changing, and we're going, hey, they were helping me with the trash and telling me they loved me yesterday, and today they're like calling me bro and telling me get out of the way, right? What happened? And we were talking about how that's nature. Like you can't be mad at them for what they're going through because that's nature. But it's important how you nurture them through that because a lot
mm,
of times, we'll nurture too much. And then you have, I don't know if you've heard the saying, a man will become a man when a man is needed.
mm,
And so a lot of times, there's 40-year-old boys because they never had to be a man because their parents, grandparents, family, whatever, coddled them and they didn't have the responsibilities. And the same thing with women, there's 30-year-old women out there that are acting like 13-year-old girls because we never allowed them or gave them the responsibility to become women. And so that's kind of been our conversation this week. And I was glad you were coming on because I wanted to kind of talk about that. There's a lot of people now who need to get over things that were from, the best intentions, sometimes not good intentions, but there's
sure.
so much that we drag into our adulthood and our emotional maturity can kind of be stunted because of
Mm,
things we don't even realize. So I absolutely am on board with the coaching and therapy together, that's amazing, because like you said, you can have a coach. We can tell you all day long to take 100 million steps or just 2 steps and you'll better your life. But if there's something holding you back that you don't even realize is there, then all the coaching in the world isn't going to help. So,
Yeah.
I'd love for you to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper.
Sure. Well, a lot of it comes from my own story. I so interestingly enough, I even in my life, I was a victim longer than I was a man who's living empowered. I struggled most of my life living in victimhood. I was diagnosed in high school with anxiety, depression, and panic disorder. I had a lot of suicidal ideation. I had self harm tendencies. There were many things that I was doing to try and control my life, which seemingly felt out of control. And there were for many, many reasons. One is that I was ostracized. Two is that I was bullied. I was rejected by everyone. I was a little bit fat. I was kind of out of shape. And so I was a very easy target. I didn't get any girls interested in me. Guys made fun of me. I got thrown in trash cans. I got pushed down steps. I mean, my whole life has been wanting to belong somewhere and never fitting in anywhere.
Mm,
And what I tried to do was reinvent myself, and I didn't do it very successfully. So in college, I had said, this is gonna be my chance. If anyone's ever seen that movie, The New Guy, where the guy walks in and like, "Who the heck are you?" And he's like, "I'm the new guy," and he's the coolest kid in the school when he used to be a loser. That was kinda how my arc was going as well. And I got super fed up with my life in high school, and I was like, this is where I'm gonna shift things. And so going into college, I wrote on all of my college transcripts my name as Vincenzo instead of Vincent because I thought, one, it was cooler, and two, Vincent was a loser. I don't want to associate with him.
mm,
I'm done with that guy. And it sort of worked. I started working out, I grew a beard, I had cooler clothes, and Vincenzo was just this everything I couldn't be. However, the issues never went away because I did an external shift, but the internal was still probably just as bad. So women would be interested in me, and I would just not even know. They would go over to my friend. They'd be like, "What's up with your friend?" What do you mean? Well, I flirted with him, and he just walked away from me. And it's like, oh, that Vin, he doesn't get it. Don't worry about him. Like he's probably interested in you. Just go talk to him more.
mm,
And so I always had these issues with women, and then even with guys, I had like if the guys went out and they didn't call me, all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, like do they hate me now? Like
mm,
why am I not getting the invite? And I started getting this anxious attachment style. And as college progressed, I seemingly was continuing to get worse and worse, so much so that in my master's program, I was having full blown panic attacks. I wasn't able to make any decisions unless I called my therapist on the phone.
mm,
I was trying to drop out of school. I was having like mental breakdowns, and life was so friggin' hard for me. And at about 23 years old, I finally figured it out. And that's what ultimately led me to stop playing the victim and start looking at how can I change the trajectory and the outcome of my life? Because ultimately, what you need to show people is that if they're in a unfavorable circumstance, if they're getting an outcome they do not want or desire, it's because they are either contributing to that or by not contributing, they're still contributing to that lifestyle.
mm.
And that is a hard thing for people to realize. And that was hard for me to realize, which is why I was seemingly stuck for so long.
I love that story. I love that you've overcome so much. It's a lot easier to take lessons from people who have actually lived it than just people who have studied it. So I love that you're sharing that with us. I appreciate that. Can you maybe give us some easy steps on how we can our audience can start gently walking into a path to make changes in their own lives like you did yours? Because sometimes we're asking for a lot. You mentioned Tony Robbins, and I'm a big fan of Ed Milet and David Meltzer, as you know, and a lot of these speakers. But a lot of times it seems like a stretch when someone is so new on the path to learning themselves and making changes and realizing that they're the ones holding them back and they're doing the work. But it seems like such a distance to get from beginner stage to high achiever. What would you say would be the first steps if you were doing this all over again, knowing what you know now, but having to start over? What would you say would be those first couple of steps that would make it not necessarily easy, but probably a little bit more gentler slide to get way over here from here?
Sure. I have a question for you before I answer that. Have
Okay,
you ever heard the term up shit's creek without a paddle?
maybe. I don't know about Schitt's Creek. That's a show I know. Yes.
So that phrase, right? It's always a funny one to me. I always found it hilarious, right? Up shit's creek without a paddle. Now, it's spelled differently. I know the show you're talking about, but it's definitely spelled this is the one that's coming out the other side of you. Now,
This is the emoji, right? Yeah.
yes, yes, this is the poop emoji. But why that saying is pretty interesting is because, well, if you're up shit's creek without a paddle, it means you're kind of screwed in the direction you're going.
Mm,
And so when I thought about that, it actually, to some degree, it brought up a analogy, or not an analogy. It brought up an acronym.
mm,
Said, well, you might be up Shit's Creek without a paddle, but what if you were in Shit's Creek with an oar? So you could still use an oar to steer a ship, right? But my oar is ownership, accountability, and responsibility.
mm.
Because to change your life, you need those three elements.
Absolutely.
And if you're living as a victim, chances are you're up Shit's Creek without an oar. And so to start changing things, you need to develop your oar. Now, what is that? Ownership is the understanding. It is the first piece of transformation. I didn't tell you guys how I transformed at 23. So let me just give you a little context. I think your listeners will love this. So if you guys are listening, please take out a pen and paper. You're going to need this. Notes. So I had a moment, I call it my moment in the mirror. And this is where I was in my bathroom and I was completely frustrated with life. And I slammed my hands on the counter because I couldn't figure out. I'm 23 years old. I have my license to practice psychotherapy. I'm in good shape. I have a hot girlfriend. I have a sports car. I have a good paying job that I'm about to start. I have everything life tells me I'm supposed to have to be happy. Why aren't I?
Mm,
Couldn't figure that out. Made no sense, right?
mhm,
And so I really had to dig deep. And in that moment of utter frustration was what I call a moment of grace. It was my clarity moment that transformed and changed the trajectory of my life forever. And what that was I finally looked up at myself in the mirror and I said, "Oh my God, I figured it out. You're Vincent." Why is that so important? Well, if you remember from my story before, I said I changed my name to Vincenzo. I no longer wanted to be Vincent because he was a loser and he had life happening to him instead of for him. And who wants that? Kind of like being up Shit's Creek without a paddle.
mhm,
And so, because I wasn't willing to embrace who I was, I could never change my life. But in the moment I declared who I was, it allowed me to take accountability. It allowed me to take ownership. It allowed me to start shifting responsibility. So then I had to ask, you're Vincent, but who is Vincent? So this
mhm,
is the first piece, right? Be honest. Who are you? So I had to answer that and I had to answer it truthfully. I had to say, I'm a loser. I am not a leader. People pity me. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I hate my life. I'm suicidal. I'm sad. This was all true. And as crappy as it was to acknowledge, you can't change anything if you can't acknowledge it. You can't change it if you can't own it. So now that I owned it and I was willing to start accepting it, I can change the trajectory of my life. Which brought me to the next question is who do you want to become? So that's the second piece. Who are you striving to evolve into?
mhm,
Because life is about evolution, it's about process. So now that was another question that I had to give the answers to, and the answers were a lot easier to give. In fact, they felt better to give. So the
mhm,
question had the answers of I want to be a leader, I want to be inspiring, I want to be powerful, I want to be excited, I want to be loving, I want to be strong, I want to help people. And then the last question, which is responsibility comes in, is how are you going to do that, right? What would a leader do? So now we get granular. How does the leader show up? What do they say? What do they think? What do they do? What are their behaviors? What are their actions? How do they make others feel? How do they feel? How do they show up in this world? And then I took all the things I said I want to become and I got granular for each one.
mhm,
So in taking your ownership, in taking your accountability, and in taking your responsibility, you're able to start with where you're at, create the trajectory of where you want to go, and then live it out every day. And you have to believe it as you become it.
That was so much more valuable than I was anticipating. Thank you for sharing that. I can imagine what it's like to actually be coached by you. This is amazing already. What a great start. So
Thank you.
what else are you doing out there? I know to touch a billion lives, I see you on Instagram a lot. I of course met you at office hours with David Meltzer. So I know you're out there doing great things and really, really making an effort to impact a billion lives. What else are you doing? Where can we find you? How can we support and get connected with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to do as much as I can. I'm looking to just be on every stage possible, every podcast I can, anywhere I could share my message. So that I guess that brings us to social medias. I could be found on any of your favorite platforms. I'm on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. It's all the same. It's all Vin Infante. And you could find me anywhere. I have a bunch of free resources on my website if you want to check that out. It's www.vincentinfante.life. And I have a few other businesses and things I'm working on, but obviously coaching and my speaking is my main parts. So these are the best ways to get in touch with me is just be involved in the things I love doing.
Awesome. So we're going to rebrand you as Vinfinite. No, Vin Infinite, the superhero. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today. Do you have any questions for me before we log off of here?
Of course. Of course I do. I mean, this is your podcast, but let's give your viewers something to hear from you. What in your life do you feel is one of the biggest things that helped you transform using using ownership, accountability, and responsibility?
Absolutely. And I mentioned this before. I don't want to be repetitive, but I think a story is great, and especially when it's true. It The biggest thing for me, and I think that happened a lot in little segments. Like I started taking responsibility and accountability and all of that in small bites as a young adult,
Mm.
and it wasn't until my life flashed before my eyes with my kidney cancer diagnosis and I wrote down everything that I regret that I hadn't done yet. I just really thought I was going to die without having done all these things I had these big plans for. And then I wrote down all the reasons I didn't do them, and a lot of them were really valid reasons, a lot of them were excuses, but the common denominator was me. And so that's when I took accountability and responsibility that the reason I hadn't done these things was because I was holding myself back. And that was probably the biggest shift for me. It still took a few more, steps in really changing my life and my behavior, I think, which comes along with that accountability. But that's when I shed my skin and really stepped into who I wanted to be.
I love what you said that you found all of those great ways of taking accountability and responsibility and even the pieces of ownership. That's so huge because people don't realize that we are giving ourselves so many excuses. And I think if people were able to get out of their own way, they could really achieve anything. And that's ultimately what I think a lot of these conversations come down to is that you are the person holding yourself back. You are the person that is making the excuses, not being willing to own the fact that maybe you're scared, or maybe you just don't believe in yourself enough, or maybe you don't have the skill set or the tool set or the resources, whatever it is. But I love that you specifically had taken that accountability and ownership and you turned around and you said, you know what? This is all bullshit. I'm changing my whole life. So I appreciate you for that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to use that or for sure. And I think everybody should use it. If you're not where you want to be, if you're struggling, if you feel like life keeps beating you up and you take a few steps forward and then a few steps back, I think the or is perfect. You have so much more control over your life than you think you do. So I just encourage everybody to remind themselves of that, write that down somewhere, stick it on a mirror, and remember, the only person that can change your life is you.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. You'll have to come on again. Be sure and look us up if you come down to the Dallas area, South Lake, Texas. We're putting them on the map, right?
Love it.
So look forward to seeing you again soon. And thanks so much for coming on the show.
Same here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Fight to Fly. And don't forget to subscribe for even more motivational content and lessons from high achievers. We love to hear your feedback, so be sure to comment and rank us below and tell us what you got out of today's show, be it a laugh or a lesson. And catch us next week on the Fight to Fly show.